Well, hello everybody. This is Dennis Wynne back with y'all, and tonight we're going to be revisiting Part 3B of Quantrell and his Raiders, and we hope you guys enjoy this show. Apologies for last week. This is going to be Part 3B on the podcast, and Dorian is here with me right now, and once again, before we get started, I just want to once again mention to you guys, Predator Tools. If you're in the market for a shovel, you're just not going to beat them. And you can go to PredatorTools.com for George Lesch's tools that he sells there, or give him a call at 856-455-3790. So right now, I've got Dorian with me. Dorian, how are you doing, brother?
Hey, I'm locked and loaded, buddy. We're ready. We're ready for action here.
Good deal. Well, guys out in the audience there, if something happens and you guys don't hear us, be sure and let me know. I think we've got all the quirks worked out of our system on our end, and we're ready to proceed on. And Dorian, you mentioned that you're going to back up just a little bit and share with folks a little bit of what we did last week. So I'm going to hand it over to you right now, bud.
Okay. Well, I'd like to say to everyone that's listening in live tonight, on behalf of myself and Dennis and Mike Hare, just like to say that, we realize that your time is valuable, and the fact that you've chosen to spend some of it with us here live this evening, that means a great deal to me. I think you do us an honor, and we really appreciate that. And we'll do our very, very best for you. We've got, it's hard not to do your best when you've got a subject as fascinating as what we've been getting into. Here we are well into the story of Quantrell and his Raiders, but they're still very much in the process of learning what would you call it, the craft of guerrilla warfare?
Absolutely.
Dennis, they're actually going to invent new ways to fight guerrilla warfare, as we see. They've got a leader who, frankly, is a natural military genius.
Absolutely, I agree.
He makes mistakes, as we saw. He got his men, trapped in 3 times in houses and surrounded by overwhelming numbers, and yet he got them out. He got them out with very few casualties, got them out alive, and inflicted a tremendous amount of damage on his enemies. So he got the guerrillas were, you might say they were baptized into constantly fighting against what would have been called in normal Civil War circles overwhelming odds. And they got to the point where, they just didn't particularly faze them. The only comparison I can think of in modern times would be our special forces. Like the Delta Force and the Navy SEALs. They operate almost continually against superior odds when they go on their secret missions and things. And truly, I know during the Iraq War, a Delta Force team was spotted. I believe it was Delta Force. They were spotted at a road intersection where they dug a bunker on an elevation where they could watch the military traffic. This was inside Iraq before the United States had left Kuwait to come and conquer Saddam Hussein and his regime. And they had a little girl in a nearby little mud hut village that wandered up and actually looked into the slit and saw them in there. And their doctrine, official training and doctrine, called for them to jerk the little girl inside and kill her. But they couldn't do it because they're Americans, and Americans seem to have a deep, deep set compassion in their hearts for the helpless.
Exceptionalism, I agree. Yeah, and I'm glad that they didn't. I think just kind of off topic a little bit, but I believe that this country represents the best that's out there personally.
Well, I'm going to
go ahead, brother.
I'm sorry. I'm going to tie this story into story involving Harrison Trow himself. We're going to get to see Harrison Trow in action tonight. And we're going to, like I said, there's a story that relates to, let me just finish that story with these 4 guys that are inside this little bunker they've dug in the hill. She runs back, the little girl runs back to the village, tells her father. The old father's an old man, old gray-bearded man, kind of like me, and he comes up and he gets down, looks right in at him. There's these 4 guys in camouflage, gun barrels sticking out at him, and they couldn't kill him either. And he goes back, screaming, yelling at the village, and somebody had a phone and they call for help. And 150 Republican guards show up and attack these 4 men in this bunker. And Dennis, when the smoke had cleared, they fought a 2-hour battle. And when the smoke had cleared, they had killed 125 out of the 150 Republican guards.
Wow.
And a helicopter came and rescued all 4 men. And the amazing thing was, not a one of them had a wound. And they'd had 150 men firing automatic weapons at them. You almost, you're almost tempted to think divine intervention. It was like they showed mercy and they got mercy, so to speak. So anyway, you'll see how that ties into what the situation Harrison Trow found himself in. But I want to back up just a little bit before we pick up where we left off. Do you remember, everyone, we learned about the ambush that they set at a place called the Blue Cut. They were being chased. They escaped one of the houses there, and it was a place where they killed a 12-year-old boy. The Yankee soldiers put 17 bullets in him. Anyway, on their way, trying to escape back to the Little Blue River, get across it, and get away from the Yankees, they came to this place called the Blue Cut, and they described it. Trow says it was about, in width, it was about 50 yards, and the height of each embankment was about 30 feet. I believe I found a picture of the Blue Cut. So if you're following along in the supplemental pictures that are posted on the All Metal page, please look at picture number 8. And I think you're looking at the Blue Cut. It's kind of grown up. That's an old road, old Civil War era road that goes between those big rock outcroppings. But boy, wouldn't that be a perfect place for an ambush. Man, would I like to swing a detector on that spot. And while I'm speaking of metal detecting, had a strange thing happen. One of our Civil War group members, We Dig the Civil War headquarters members, is on a project down in Texas, uncovering dinosaur tracks. He's an archaeologist, and he emailed me last night, and he met a man, another volunteer on the project, who's from a little town about 8 miles south of Independence, Missouri, and has some acreage and just bought 5 more acres, and he's been told that there was all kinds of Civil War activity on the property, some of it connected with Quantrell. So he's never detected it, doesn't own a detector. He doesn't think it's ever been detected. And it looks like I might get to go hunt that. So I might actually be able to show you some Quantrell relics before we get done with this series. I'll have to admit I am really excited about that. That just popped out of the blue last night. So we'll see if that comes together. I have made the man a proposition, and like I said, we'll see how. Whether he accepts or not, I'll know in a day or two. And we're going to set up a hunt there. And so I'm really excited about that. So anyway, all right. So now you see the Blue Cut. Now we're going to go on down about to where we stopped. Quantrell had just got into his 3rd bad situation by not posting proper guards in a house they were in, and they fought their way free. If you remember, just about the time we lost the sound. Let's see, let me stroll down. Okay. So what they had to do when they had to flee without their horses because they'd been captured by the enemy, he would disband, and then they would be given 30 days to get new horses and saddles and bridles and everything, and then they would set a rendezvous point. So we finished up. This was called the Fight at the Low House. We were just finishing that up. It occurred the first week in May 1862 and caused the expedition against Harrisonville to be abandoned. There is a picture of Harrisonville that is, let me see if I have them. Yeah, here we go. It's a modern picture, but the buildings look kind of old. It's picture number 10, I'm sorry, if you want to see some of Harrisonville's downtown area. Okay, now, so anyway, this episode ends with this statement by Trow: 3 times surprised and 3 times losing all horses, saddles, and bridles, it became necessary to disband the guerrillas in this instance as in the preceding 2. So they were dismissed for 30 days and orders to remount themselves. And remember, there was a man with Quantrell, one of his captains named George Todd. And George Todd, if you want to refresh your memory, you want to look at picture number 11. Both pictures are of George Todd. Now, it's very interesting that he's wearing a Union officer's uniform here, because we're going to see that's exactly what he did on the adventures that he and Quantrell are about to have. So I think that was just a perfect picture for what we're going to be looking at here. Okay, so Quantrell and Todd needed to do something. They were running low on what they call revolver caps or percussion caps. They had percussion Colt revolvers. Most of them were the Navy Colt, what they call the Dragoon style. And they actually made their own cartridges, but they couldn't make the percussion caps, so they had to buy those. And they were cut off from trade with Kansas City. It was just too dangerous to appear openly there. And they, had not captured many from their enemies. They'd been busy running from their enemies and not really, they killed a lot of their enemies, but they didn't hold the ground that they killed them on. So they couldn't go through the bodies and remove their percussion cap boxes and things like that. They just slowed down the pursuing forces. So now they're going to try to rectify this critical shortage of percussion caps, and they take off on a mission to do this. Harrison Trow makes a comment about this particular period in the guerrillas' history. He says, recruits were coming in and the season for larger operations was at hand. In exploits where peril and excitement were about evenly divided, Quantrell took great delight. He was so cool, so calm, he had played before such a deadly game. He knew so well how to smile when a smile would win, and when to frown when a frown was a better card to play. And something in this expedition appealed to every quixotic instinct of his intrepidity. Now, a lot of you younger people may not even never heard the word quixotic. There was a man named Cervantes was an author. He wrote a book called Don Quixote, and that's where we get the word quixotic, but it was actually pronounced Quixote in Spanish. And Don Quixote was a buffoon that pictured himself kind of as a knight that was going to be this saving the world, more or less. And he ended up tilting, that is, attacking windmills with a lance on a horse, because he was kind of nuts. So he said this expedition appealed to every quixotic instinct of his intrepidity. I'll tell you what, folks, a lot of these guys that we're dealing with in the Civil War, all the way up to the generals, their education had come in a one-room schoolhouse where the only school book they had was the Bible. And if you get into the letters in the official records of the Civil War that passed between officers, and you read those records, you will discover that they had a better education than you and I do. They will throw vocabulary words at you that you do not know. They've done it to me, and that's kind of one of my strong suits. And I've had to admit that my education was not as good as these men that had got their educations in the one-room schoolhouse. So it's no surprise to me that Trow is throwing around words like this, because the people of that time would have understood him, would have understood those words. Now, a lot of these words, oh, well, what's that word? I've never heard of that word. You know, that's kind of reaction you get from some of our wonderful scholars of the current generation here. All right, now, he said, this is very interesting. This shows us something about Quantrell and also Todd. Todd was all iron, Quantrell all glue. Todd would go at a circular saw, talking about the big circular saws they had in the sawmills that were run by steam or even by hand. I don't know all the ways they ran those things, but they had big belts and all this kind of stuff. That's what he's talking about. Todd would go at a circular saw. Quantrell, listen to this, Quantrell would sharpen its teeth and grease it where there was friction. One purred and killed, the other roared and killed. But what mattered the mode, however, only so the end was the same. Only so the end was the same. So Troll makes a point here. These men had two different approaches to the fighting of a guerrilla war, and yet they actually fit like hand and glove together, and they could work together, both of them using their skills in these areas. So we're now going to start the 7th chapter, and this is called Quantrell and Todd Go After Ammunition. So clad in the full uniform of federal majors, a supply of which Quantrell kept always on hand, even in a day so early in the war as this, Quantrell and Todd rode into Hamilton, a little town on the Hannibal and St. Louis Railroad. And you know what? I missed it. I should have looked up the town of Hamilton and see if it's still there and posted a picture, but I didn't. And they remained for the night at the principal hotel. A federal garrison was there, 2 companies of Iowa infantry. So if the companies were full, that would be a couple of hundred men. And the captain commanding took a great fancy to Todd, insisting that he should leave the hotel for his quarters and share his blankets with him. Can you imagine if you were a Yankee officer and you naively offer this man to share your quarters, and he is a totally cold-blooded stone killer who hates Yankees, and you're going to put him right in your room? How about that one, Dennis?
No, thank you. He had no idea, did he, brother?
He had no idea.
Good Lord.
Yeah. And I have to wonder, Todd's not going to kill him. So I have to wonder if later on, if he ever found out how he'd been deceived and what he thought about how close he came to hearing, as the old saying goes, how close he came to hearing angel feathers. All right. Okay, so he says, you know what? Okay. Hamilton's a little town on the Hannibal and St. Louis Railroad. That would be an interesting old railroad to research. He says 2 days were spent in Hannibal. Now, I did include pictures of Hannibal. Hannibal, Missouri is an interesting town. If you're not familiar with it, it is right on the Mississippi River. You want to go to picture number 12 on the supplemental photos, and that's a great view of the downtown area from, I guess, up in the air, and you can see the Mississippi River in the background. Here's another view of one of the main streets. There's a big hill, and everything kind of comes down to the flat by the river. In picture number 13, And I also threw in picture number 14. That is the home of a very famous man. That's Mark Twain's home. And all I can say to you young'uns is, if you don't know who Mark Twain is, shame on you. You need to do a little research and find out who Mark Twain is and what he wrote. Mark Twain was one of our greatest literary scholars, wise man author. He originally wrote Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn, which is still a classic read by people around the world today. Anyway, there's a picture of Mark Twain standing in the doorway of his house in Hannibal. Okay, let me bring my notes back up. Okay, so there was an entire federal regiment stationed in Hannibal. We got 1,000 men here approximately, give or take a few. And he says here Quantrell was more circumspect or more careful. When asked to give an account of himself and his companion, he replied promptly that Todd was a major of the 6th Missouri Cavalry, and himself was the major of the 9th. Now, unacquainted with either organization, the commander in Hannibal had no reason to believe otherwise. Then he asked about that special cutthroat, Quantrell. Was it true that he fought under a black flag? Had he ever really belonged to the Jayhawkers? How much truth was there in the stories of the newspapers about his operations and prowess? Okay, this points out something to you. This man is the commander of a regiment. He's responsible for the lives of 1,000 soldiers. He's in a war zone that is developing into a war zone like no other in the history of our country. And he's ignorant. Take a look at what he's asking. He should know these things already. Now, I respect the fact that he's trying to find out, but why do they send? They will send these commanders into areas that they know nothing about. They would take Civil War generals. They knew how to line up men, and march towards each other and fire volleys, and they would send them out to the west to fight Indians. And they would get their troops slaughtered time after time because they didn't know anything about the Indians or fighting Indians. And they weren't given any time to learn. That's a big mistake throughout the entire history of the American Army, all the way back to the Indian Wars here in Kentucky back in the 1760s. These stupid kinds of mistakes and commanders who were really not qualified for the job they were given. All right, rant done, let's continue. Was it true they fought under a black flag and so on? Okay, how much truth was there? All right, in the stories of the newspapers about his operation and his prowess. Prowess means his skills, his cunning and his skills. Well, Quantrell became voluble. Now, that's a word, you don't hear much these days, but it is a good dictionary word. He became very talkative. In rapid yet picturesque language, he painted a perfect picture of the war along the border. He told of Todd, Jarrett, Blunt, Younger, Haller, Poole, Shepard, Gregg, Little, the Cogers, and all of his best men just as they were, and himself also just as he was. And you're going to love this. And he closed the conversation emphatically by remarking, "If you were here, Colonel, surrounded as you are by 1,000 soldiers, and they wanted you, they would come and get you." Isn't that great? The guy is talking to Quantrell himself. Man, you gotta love it. You just gotta love it. That's just simply amazing to me. Now, some of these names we haven't talked about yet, like the Cogers and Little and Gregg and others. They will come into the story more, and you will meet them and get an idea of what they're like. Reminder, picture number 1. We have 2 of the guerrillas. Poole, Dave Poole is in that picture. And I really love this picture. And I put the two together, John Jarrett and Dave Poole in picture number 1. Take a look at him again, and look at Dave Poole. You can see 5 revolvers, 1 in his hand and 4 in his belt. And if you're careful, you can find 5 revolvers on John Jarrett. So, these were 2 great pictures to prove what I was told by Jesse James III about them having the special holsters that carried 6 pistols. This certainly tends to back that up, because you can't find any pictures of regular Civil War soldiers. You can look at the hundreds and hundreds of pictures that were taken, and you will not see them carrying this kind of hardware. I mean, this many pistols. They may pose with a pistol or even 2 pistols or a pistol and a Bowie knife or something like that, but you don't see this. This is very, very unique. All right, now, from Hannibal, after buying quietly and at various times and in various places 50,000 revolver caps, 50,000 percussion caps. What does that tell you about their plans? Dennis, I would say that's quite a lot, wouldn't you?
It is, absolutely. That's at least a battle or 2.
At least a battle or 2. There you go. Okay, so Quantrell and Todd, then they go boldly into St. Joseph. Now, St. Joseph, I've got pictures of that up, and they will be let me scroll down, they're past the blue cut. Oh, by the way, the blue cut was picture number 8, and picture number 9 is another view of the Little Blue River. You saw one picture before. Here's another view of it. There was all kinds of regular Civil War battles and guerrilla battles along this river. It was a key geographical feature or geologic feature in this part of the war that we're studying. The Little Blue River. There was also the Big Blue River, but it doesn't figure in as much, at least so far, as the Little Blue does. All right, now, let's see here. What are we looking for again? Dennis, help me out here. I derailed my own train. Let's see. Oh, St. Joseph. I'm sorry. We were looking for pictures of St. Joseph.
Yeah.
And they are...
Y'all excuse his singing. That's not his forte.
I don't want to run the audience off. I better shut up there.
Yeah.
Well, I know I put a picture of St. Joseph in here. At least I thought I did. Oh, yeah. Oh, absolutely. Here you go. Pictures, 2 pictures, number 17, number 18. Number 17 was taken probably early 1900s. You see they're still driving horses and buggies. But if you look at number 18, it's actually a picture of St. Joseph with a part of a Yankee regiment formed up right in the street. So you're looking, that's like a window right back into this time period when Quantrell and his men, or his man Todd, saw scenes like this when they were in St. Joseph. And later on, it would become famous as the town where Bob Ford killed Jesse James. Of course, we know he didn't really kill Jesse James. That's where, to me, it's the town famous for the facts that this is where Jesse James faked his own death and was a pallbearer at his own funeral and was the man who identified Charlie Bigelow as Jesse James. So, yeah, St. Joe is quite a significant city, but that was after the Civil War, and this is during. Okay. So this city was full of soldiers. Yeah, I can believe that from the picture. Colonel Harrison B. Branch was there in command of a regiment of militia. Now, what's the difference between militia and regular troops? Think of militia as the National Guard. They were called up for the citizens of Missouri They were not actually official Army soldiers in that regard. They wore the uniform. They looked like Yankee soldiers. But they were definitely, there was a lot greater age range. There were old men and young men and everything than you would probably have in your regular Army regiments. Okay, so Trost describes Colonel Branch as a brave, conservative, right-thinking soldier. And Quantrell introduced himself to Branch as Major Henderson of the 6th Missouri. Todd, by this time, had put on, in lieu of a major's epaulets with its distinguishing leaf, the barred ones of a captain. Todd's comment to Quantrell, the reason for so doing, he said, "Too many majors traveling together are like too many roses in a bouquet. The other flowers don't have a chance. Let me be a captain for the balance of the trip." So Colonel Branch made himself very agreeable to Major Henderson and Captain Gordon, and he asked Todd if he were a relative of the somewhat notorious Cy Gordon of Platte, relating at the same time an interesting adventure he once had with him. And here's the adventure. En route from St. Louis in 1861 to the headquarters of his regiment, Colonel Branch, with $130,000 on his person, and I'm glad this is in here, folks, because I want to help dispel a misconception about Army payrolls. He's carrying $130,000 on his person. I'll guarantee you he's not carrying $130,000 in gold. He wouldn't be able to move.
Yep.
If it would be so heavy. And he's not carrying it in silver. He's carrying it in currency. So all these Army payrolls, Civil War payrolls that were turned up missing or stolen that were gold were not gold. Okay? Maybe a few of the generals, upper, men got paid occasionally in gold coins, but the lower ranks did not get paid in gold. All right. Okay, so he found that he would have to remain in the town of Weston overnight and the better part of the next day. Now, I've got a picture of Weston. That will be back up a little bit. I got a picture of Weston then and now. I got two pictures. Be number 15, number 16, if you want to look at Weston. I like number 15. It's a painting, but it really captures the feel of the town. And if you look down at the end of the street, you can see it's on the Mississippi River, and there's a riverboat in the picture. Okay, so he had to remain in Weston overnight, and before he got out of the town, Gordon, obviously a Confederate, a guerrilla, took it, and with it he took Colonel Branch. In other words, he captured the colonel. Many of Gordon's men were known to Colonel Branch, and it was eminently to his interest just then to renew old acquaintanceships and be extremely compliant to the new. Wherever he could find the largest number of guerrillas, there he was among them, calling for whiskey every now and then, incessantly telling some agreeable story or amusing anecdote. Thus he got through with what seemed to him an interminably long day. Not a dollar of his money was touched, Gordon releasing him unconditionally when the town was abandoned and bidding him make haste to get out, lest the next lot of raiders make it the worse for him. So here's a case of this Cy Gordon, a guerrilla fighter, sparing the life of Colonel Branch. I doubt Quantrell and his men would have spared the colonel's life under those conditions. So it's quite an adventure, makes a great story. He's lucky to be alive. So for 3 days, off and on, Quantrell was either with Branch at his quarters or in company with town about him. Todd, elsewhere and indefatigable, was rapidly buying caps and revolvers. Okay, this is the first place where revolvers are part of the purchases. Caps are very small, and you could put 50,000 caps probably in a backpack. But revolvers are heavy, and if you're going to buy those, they have to be boxed, and they would have to be hauled in a wagon, or at least on some mules. A mule could carry 200 pounds of cargo. So, and I can understand why they would want revolvers, because most of their new recruits, or virtually all their new recruits, are not going to show up with 6 revolvers. But Quantrell's going to want to arm them just like the rest of the men, because he wants that increased firepower. So if they're going to do that, then they have to come into possession of a lot more revolvers than they would have around the house or the farm when they went to war. So I guess revolvers were fairly easy to get then. So it says that Colonel Branch introduced Quantrell to General Ben Lone and discussed Pinnock, and I'm not sure if Pinnock's a colonel, probably was a colonel. He was the commander of a regiment, and he was a St. Joseph officer destined in the near future to give Quantrell some stubborn fighting. And it says, Branch passed in review the military situation, discussed the military situation, incidentally referred to the guerrillas of Jackson County and the savage nature of the warfare going on there, predicted the absolute destruction of African slavery, and assisted Quantrell in many ways in making his mission thoroughly successful. Yes, because what Quantrell has done, besides just obtaining revolvers and percussion caps, he has obtained a large amount of valuable intelligence on the locations of Yankee forces and their strength. How many cannons do they have? How many men do they have? Do they have a stockade for defense? Where would they, if this town was attacked, where would they make a stand? Would it be in the courthouse, or would it be behind a wall or something like that? So Quantrell's getting, really great military intelligence here. So you see, when you get right down to it, as we see the strategies that he's going to employ, in many ways he surpassed Robert E. Lee in the ability to come up with strategies. Lee wasn't about to go out and get his own military intelligence. Quantrell would do it in a heartbeat. All right. Oh, yeah. I like the way Tro puts this. For the first and last time in his life, Colonel Branch was disloyal to the government and the flag. He gave undoubted aid and encouragement during those 3 days to about as uncompromising an enemy as either ever had. So from St. Joseph, Quantrell and Todd came to Kansas City in a hired hack, first sending into Jackson County a man unquestionably devoted to the South with the whole amount of purchases made in both Hannibal and St. Joseph. So what Tro's not telling you is they had a secret hideaway. They had a place, a barn, maybe a basement under a barn, where they could store supplies, materials, and this man would have had a wagon, and Quantrell trusted him enough to commit all these critical supplies to his care, believing that he would get through without being captured by the Yankees or anything. So I wish Tro could tell us more about this man, because he sounds like a very impressive individual. Okay, now that finishes up chapter 7, and we're going to get into chapter 8. The title of this chapter is A Challenge. A Challenge. Now remember, All of this was taking place during the 30 days furlough he'd given his men to remount and resupply themselves with the necessary equipment. And okay, so Quantrell with his band of 63 men. All right, so we skip, Tro doesn't tell us what Quantrell and Todd did in Kansas City, but we skip a space, and Tro picks the story back up. The men have come back together. They're 63. They're being followed by a force of 700 cavalrymen under Captain Peabody again. So you see, this really illustrates what I was saying earlier about overwhelming odds. I'd say 700 against 63 is pretty overwhelming, wouldn't you, Dennis?
Absolutely. Good Lord.
Yeah. Okay, so Peabody came up in the advance with 300 men, while 400 marched at a supporting distance behind him. Quantrell halted at Swearington's barn, and I'm not sure if that's actually Swearington or Swearingen. The Swearington, I've never really seen that particular name, but from Missouri to Kentucky, there is a lot of Swearingens. In fact, all the way to Pennsylvania, as it turns out, and they've been there since the 1700s. But either way, they're halted at a barn. The guerrillas were drying their blankets. One picket, Hick George, an Iron Man who could sleep in his saddle and eat as he ran, and who suspected every act until he could fathom it, watched the rear against an attack. He was the rear guard. Now, you want to see a picture of Hick George? Be down near the end, just a moment. Let's see, maybe not near the end. Hang on, where did I put them? Oh, okay. Picture number 3. This is two of Quantrell's men. Fletch Taylor will come into our story. It's interesting because Fletch doesn't show a gun. He's the first of the guerrilla pictures that I found that is not showing a gun. But nonetheless, he showed the Yankees plenty of guns. Okay, the guy on the right is Hick George. Not a real good picture, but a typical kind of guerrilla pose there. So let's get back to the story. Captain Peabody received fire from George. In other words, George fired his gun at these advancing troops to alert his fellow guerrillas. And it said that George would fire at an angel or a devil in the line of his duty. And then the Yankees drove him back towards Quantrell at a full run. Every preparation possible under the circumstances had been made, and if the reception was not as cordial as expected, the Federals could attribute it to the long march and the rainy weather. So Tro's being a little bit sarcastic here. So he says that Quantrell stood at the gate calmly with his hand on the latch. When George entered, he would close and fasten it. Peabody's forces were within 30 feet of the fence when the guerrillas delivered a crashing blow, and or volley, we might say, and 16 Federals crashed against the barricade and fell there. Others fell and more dropped out here and there before the disorganized mass got back safe again from the deadly revolver range. You see the firepower of men who could just keep pulling guns and just keep pulling a trigger against even a mass charge when they were really seriously outnumbered. You see, it was a tactic that made up for the lack of numbers. It worked, and it'll work time and time again, as we're going to see. After them, Quantrell himself dashed hotly. George Maddox, Jarrett, Cole Younger, George Morrow, Gregg, Blunt, Poole, and Howler following them fast to the timber, and upon their return, gathering all the arms and ammunition of the killed as they went. At the timber, Peabody rearranged his lines, dismounted his men, and came forward at a quick run, yelling. But do what he would, the charge spent itself before it could really be called a charge. Those men that were charging, wearing blue uniforms, are looking at all of those bodies of their comrades laying there in front of them. And their enthusiasm for making a charge and getting into that same range and getting the same reception that those men on the ground got, they don't have any enthusiasm to do that. Excuse me. And their leader is obviously not charismatic enough to get his men to follow him into hell, because that's pretty much what he was asking of them here. Hellfire and smoke and flames and dozens of bullets coming at them. So Peabody tried again. He rallied his men again, and he tried to come forward again. And this time at double quick. He thought if they ran twice as fast, they'd complete the charge. But this one fell apart too. And, his men just instinctively retreated to find cover from the angry hornets of lead that were buzzing around them and stinging some of them to death. Never nearer than 100 yards of the fence, Peabody and his men skirmished at long range for nearly an hour. Now, can you imagine? 300 men against 63, and they are helpless. They're demoralized. So he's going to have his 400 reinforcements, and he's waiting for those. So Quantrell sent out Cole Younger, Poole, John Brinker, and William Haller to lay up close to Peabody, as he expressed it, and keep him and his movements steadily in view. The four daredevils multiplied themselves. They attacked the pickets, rode around the whole camp in bravado, firing upon it from every side, and finally agreed to send a flag of truce into Peabody with this manner of a challenge. And this is all theatrics. This is to give Quantrell and his men time to escape. Look what they do here. They write this out and they send it into Peabody. It says, "We, whose names are hereunto affixed, respectfully ask of Colonel Peabody the privilege of fighting 8 of his best men hand to hand, and that he himself make the selection and send them out to us immediately." Have you ever heard of anything like that, Dennis, related to the Civil War?
Never. So that was that going to determine the outcome, or they just show them they're going to put a whooping on them?
They're not even serious about this. Wow. This is a delaying tactic, and it's brilliant.
Absolutely.
You see, it's something that the enemy never expected, and Peabody doesn't know what to do with it. It says the paper was signed by the following: Coleman Younger, William Haller, David Poole, and John Brinker. It says Younger took it in, tying a white handkerchief to a stick. He rode up to the nearest picket and asked for a parley. 6 started towards him, and he told 4 of them to go back. The message was carried to Peabody, but he laughed at it and scanned the prairie in every direction for the coming reinforcements. Meanwhile, Quantrell was retreating. His 4 men cavorting about Peabody were to amuse him as long as possible and then get away as best they could. I mean, come on, folks. This is a brilliant tactic under such circumstances. And he says such risks are often taken in war. To save 1,000 men, 100 are sometimes sacrificed. Death, equally with exactness, has its mathematics. But in this case, Quantrell knew that escape rather than sacrifice would be the most likely outcome of the four's ploy to cover his retreat from a battle he could not win. So the Yankee reinforcements came up rapidly. 100 joined Peabody on the prairie, and 200 masked themselves, that is, hid themselves by some timber on the north, and they advanced parallel, that is, in a line side by side with Quantrell's line of retreat. So they're on his flank. Haller hurried off to Quantrell to report, and Peabody, vigorous and alert, now threw out a cloud of cavalry skirmishers after the 3 remaining guerrillas. The race was won for life. Both started their horses on a keen run. Boy, wouldn't it be something to see? It was on the eve of harvest, and the wheat, breast high to the horse, flew away from before the feet of the racers as though the wind was driving through it an incarnate scything blade. As Poole struck the eastern edge of this wheat, now you're going to love this, a very large jackass belonging to a farmer named Swearingen. See, now it's right here. I thought it might be Swearingen, not Swearington. It's got to be the same man. So a very large jackass belonging to the farmer whose barn they were in joined in the pursuit, braying loudly at every jump and leading the Federals by a length. Comedy and tragedy were in the same field together. Carbines rang out, revolvers cracked, and the jack brayed. The Federals roared with merriment, and looking back over his shoulder as he rode on, Dave Poole heard the laughter and saw the jack and imagined the devil to be after him, leading a lot of crazy people. So even, in the midst of hell on earth, funny things do happen. And this was one of them. Okay, so we're going to get back into another battle here, and we're going to start chapter 9. And this is the battle and capture of Independence, Missouri. So Trost says that on August 11th, 1862, about a month prior to the capture of Independence, while Press Webb and I were out on a little frolic, this is Trost's story I was telling you about. This is very, very interesting, and this gives us some insights into the man. He says, we attended a dance at his father's, Ace Webb, and stayed all night there. During the night, a regiment of soldiers surrounded the house. 1,000 soldiers surrounded the house. We barred the doors against them, and I aimed to get away in a woman's garb. And I had my dress all on, bonnet and everything, with permission to get out of the house with the women without being fired upon. But old Mrs. Webb objected to my going out for fear it would cause her son to be killed. So I had to pull off the dress and hide my pistols in the straw tick under the feather bed and surrender to them. Okay, now Dennis, that's a plain enough statement. What did he do? What did he do? He pulled off the dress and he hid his pistols in the straw tick under the feather bed, and he surrendered to them, right?
Yep.
Is there anything else we can get out of that sentence? You see anything else in there?
No.
Okay, we're going to do a little history detective work here.
Nah.
All right, stop and think. He's got 6 pistols. He doesn't want the Federals to get all those pistols, and he doesn't want them to know that he carries 6. So he's not going to put all of his pistols under the straw tick, because if he has no weapons on him, they're going to be suspicious and look, aren't they?
Yep.
So he's going to keep 1 or 2 of his pistols and surrender those, you see.
Sure.
This is I'm pointing this out to show how the history detective thinks. He sees clues in things, and he says, wait a minute, if he hides all of his pistols, they're going to say, why is this guerrilla unarmed? And they're going to look for him, and they're going to find all of them. This way he saves at least 4, maybe 5 of his pistols, because apparently they were satisfied, and they took him to Independence, and he was a prisoner there for a month. So Trost says This is Harrison Trow. He says, while in prison, several incidents happened. A federal officer in the prison, who called himself Beauregard, was put into jail with me for some misdemeanor and challenged me to a sparring match with the understanding that neither one of us was to strike the other in the face. However, he hit me in the face the first thing he did, and I kicked him in the stomach and kept on kicking until I kicked him down the stairs. For this offense, I was chained down on my back for 10 hours. The provost marshal would come in once in a while and entertain me while I was chained down. He was a Dutchman, and he would say in broken Dutch, "How do you like it? And would you sing me a song, something like this? Don't you wish you was in Dixie, you damned old secesh?" And he would dance around me. Well, after I'd been there a few days, they cleaned up the prison and they took out the rubbish and the dirt. Press Webb, who had been captured with me, and I were detailed to do the work. We had an understanding that when we went out into the backyard, which was walled, we were each to capture the guards who were guarding us, take their arms, and scale the wall. But Webb weakened and would not attempt to take his man, so we did not attempt to get away then. Then I was court-martialed and remained there in jail while Webb was sent to Alton Prison. I was held there under court-martial and sentenced to be shot. Boy, that'd be a scary thing, wouldn't it?
It would.
All this time, Quantrell was trying to hear from me, whether I'd been killed, and at the same time getting the boys together to make a raid on Independence and try to capture the town and release me from jail, all unbeknownst to me, should I still be alive. Colonel Hughes had joined Quantrell with his company, the expedition being agreed between Quantrell and Colonel Hughes. So we have 100 regular Confederate soldiers are going to assist Quantrell. Colonel Hughes asked Quantrell for some accurate information touching the strongest and best fortified point about the town. It was 3 days previous to the attack. The day before it was begun, the information should be forthcoming. The day before it was begun. Yeah, okay. So in other words, they had to have the information by the day before. "Leave it to me," said Cole Younger, when the promise made to Hughes had been repeated by Quantrell. "And when you report, you can report the facts. A soldier wants nothing else." The two men separated. It was the 7th day of August, 1862. On the 8th at about 10 o'clock in the morning, an old woman with gray hair and wearing spectacles rode up to the public square from the south. Independence was alive with soldiers. Several market wagons were about the streets. The trade in vegetables and traffic in fruit were lively. The old woman was one of the ancient time. A faded sunbonnet, long and antique, hid almost all of her face. The riding skirt, which had once been black, was now bleached. Some tatters also abounded, and here and there an unsightly patch. On the horse was a blind bridle. It had blinders on it, so you can't see to the sides, be distracted. I think that's what this is describing. The left rein was leather and the right one was a rope. Neither did it have a throat latch. The saddle was a man's saddle, strong in the stirrups and fit for any service. Women resorted oft to such saddles then. The Civil War had made many a hard thing easy. On the old lady's arm was a huge market basket covered by a white cloth. Under the cloth were beets, garden beans, and some summer apples. As she passed the first picket, he jibed at her. "Good morning, grandmother," he said. "Does the rebel crop need any rain out in your country?" Where the reserve post was, the sergeant on duty took her horse by the bridle and peered up under her bonnet and into her face. "Were you younger and prettier, I might kiss you," he said. "Were I younger and prettier," the old lady said, "I might box your ears for your impudence." "Oh ho, you old she-wolf, what claws you have for scratching." And the rude soldier took her hand with an oath and looked at it sneeringly. She drew it away with a quick motion and started her horse so rapidly ahead that he did not have time to examine it. In a moment, he was probably ashamed of himself, and so let her ride on uninterrupted. Once well in town, nobody noticed her anymore. At the camp, she was seen to stop and give 3 soldiers some apples out of her basket. The sentinel in front of Buell's headquarters was overheard to say to a comrade, "There's the making of 4 good bushwhacking horses yet in that old woman's horse." And 2 hours later, as she rode back past the reserve picket post, in other words, he recognized that that horse was a really good horse. 2 hours later, as she rode back past the reserve picket post, the sergeant still on duty did not halt her himself, but caused one of his guards to do it. He was anxious to know what the basket contained, for in many ways of late arms and ammunition had been smuggled out to the enemy. At first, the old lady did not heed the summons to halt. That short, rasping, ominous call, which in all tongues appears to have the same sound. She did, however, shift the basket from the right arm to the left and straighten up in the saddle for the least appreciable bit. Another cry, and the old lady looked back innocently over one shoulder and snapped out, "Do you mean me?" Well, by this time, a mounted picket had galloped up to her, ranged alongside, and seized the bridle of the horse. It was 30 steps back to the post, maybe, where the sergeant and 8 men were down from their horses and the horses hitched. To the outpost, it was 100 yards, and a single picket stood there. The old woman said to the soldier as he was turning her horse around and doing it roughly, "What will you have? I'm but a poor woman going peacefully to my home." "Didn't you hear the sergeant call for you, damn you? Do you want to be carried back?" The sentinel made answer. The face under the sunbonnet transformed itself. The demure eyes behind their glasses grew deadly. From underneath the riding skirt, the heavy foot emerged. The old horse and the blind bridle seemed to undergo an electric impulse. There was the gliding of the old hand, which the sergeant had inspected into the basket, and a cocked pistol came out and was fired almost before it got in sight. With his grasp still upon the reins of the old woman's bridle, the Federal picket fell dead under the feet of the horse. Then, stupefied, the impotent reserve saw a weird figure dash away down the road, its huge bonnet flapping in the wind, and the trail of an antique riding skirt split at the shoulders, streaming back as the smoke that follows a furnace. Coleman Younger had accomplished his mission. Beneath the bonnet and the bombazine was the gorilla, and beneath the white cloth of the basket and its apples and beets and beans, the unerring revolvers. The furthest picket heard the firing, saw the apparition, bethought himself of the devil, or thought it was the devil, and he fled to the brush. So you see the kind of missions that these guys do and how they did it. Now, if you will look in our pictures at, let's see here. Yes, picture number 19. The caption on this picture that I found read, "Cole Younger in disguise as a woman on the road to independence." Now, obviously, there was no photographer to set up and take a picture of him at the time that this incident happened. So what they did was they staged this. They thought it was so good that at some point they had a photographer come out on the road to independence and take this picture. That may be Cole Younger in his dress, the one he wore. Probably is. And there you can see, beside the lady on horseback is a picture of Younger as he looked then. Obviously, he would have shaved his beard and mustache to pull off that little stunt. Okay, now, Harrison goes on talking about his stay in prison now, and he says, during this month's stay in prison, being chained down drinking coffee sweet as molasses. When they knew I did not like sweetened coffee, they made it that much sweeter. Running a boxing match, having songs sung to me of the sweet South in an insulting way, and being janitor for the jail, and thousands of other things that go with a prison life. And while Cole Younger was getting information in a disguise as an old lady, Sally selling apples and cookies to the Federals 3 days before, I made my bond. My father, being a Union man and interceding with Colonel Buell in my behalf, I made bond for $50,000 to report at headquarters every 2 hours during the day and be locked up at night. Well, it's amazing to me. This must be before they had the court-martial hearing and put him under the sentence of death. About the third day, after I gave bond and after I was thoroughly acquainted with the location of the soldiers, I made my escape through the back way, through the guard, and found my way to a nearby friend by the name of Sullivan and got a horse and saddle. Went by Webb's and got my pistols out of a hollow log back of the barn where Mrs. Webb had hid them. You notice them, it's plural. And rode on to Quantrell's camp, arriving there about 11 o'clock that night. After telling Quantrell how the soldiers and camps were located, and as Younger had told him about 6 hours before, it was decided to make the charge the next morning. And after a hard night's riding, we struck Independence just a little before daylight on the morning of August 11th, 1862, surprised the camp, and 900 soldiers, with the exception of the colonel who was in command, surrendered to 250 of us. Incredible victory. Colonel Buell was quartered in a brick building with his bodyguard, and it was not until about 9 o'clock that he surrendered. Buell lost about 300 killed, besides 375 wounded. We had a loss of only 1 man killed and 4 wounded. Boy, that sounds like some of those battles in the Bible. That's amazing.
It is.
675 casualties against 5.
Mm.
He said, we had a loss, in attempting to take the provost marshal who tortured me so when I was in prison, Kit Child was shot and killed. Couldn't find any pictures of him, making 2 men lost in the attack, all told. In the skirmish, I was badly cut up by a saber, so Troe got a wound. But I got away from them on foot, and so did Quantrell. While the colonel was slashing at me, I struck him with a heavy dragoon pistol and burst his kneecap, and he fell off his horse. This ended the fight, and that night we got together at camp, and Quantrell came in on foot, and I had to remount. Excuse me, I'm going to grab a drink of water real quick. Anybody have any questions or comments?
They did say Younger, Bill said Younger must have been wearing some heavy makeup to hide the goatee.
I'm sure he shaved it. Yeah. And by the way, this is not the last time that we're going to see the ruse of a women's clothing. We're going to see young Jesse James do the same thing when we get farther along in the book. Quite a story. I'm telling you, we're not going to run out of good stories tonight. Believe me, folks. It's going to just keep coming for a while. I don't know how many shows it's going to take, but I'm going to stay on this thing until we've covered it from one end to the other, all the way to the end of the war. As long as we've got an audience, I'm willing to do it. All right. He said, Troe says, if Quantrell's men could have been decorated for the day's fight, and if it reviews some typical thing that stood for glory could have passed along the ranks, calling the roll of the brave, there would have answered modestly yet righteously, Troe, Haller, Gregg, Jarrett, Morris Poole, Younger, James Tucker, Blunt, George Shepard, Yeager, Hicks, George, last name George, Sim Whitsett, Fletch Taylor. See, there's Fletch Taylor. I showed you the picture of him didn't have a gun. The guy didn't have a gun in the picture. Fletch Taylor, John Ross, Dick Burns, Kit Childs, Dick Maddox, Fernando Scott, Sam Clifton, and George Maddox. We got a picture of George Maddox with his revolvers, I believe, in part 1 in the pictures I believe we posted. Sam Hamilton, Press Webb, John Coger, Dan Vaughn, and 20 others, some dead now, but dead in vain for their country. There were no decorations, however, but there was a deliverance. Crammed in the county jail and sweltering in the midsummer's heat were old men who had been pioneers in the land, and young men who had been sentenced to die. The first preached the Confederacy, and it triumphant. The last, to make it so, enlisted for the war. These jailbirds, either as missionaries or militants, had work to do. Of course, if you haven't figured it out, he's talking about that they freed them when they attacked independence. All right, now we're going to get into something called the Lone Jack fight. Lone Jack is a little town in Missouri, and we have some pictures. They're down at the end of the pictures, would be numbers. We want to start with number 22. There's a picture of Main Street, Lone Jack, Missouri. Wasn't a big town. And then in picture number 23, we have a marker about the battle. Now, if you'll look at picture number 23, we see this is this is not Quantrell's battle, but Tro's about to talk about this battle. I want to show you a discrepancy here. On the marker, it says, here early in the morning of August 16, 1862, 2,000 Confederates surprised and defeated a detachment of Federal cavalry under the command of Major Emory S. Foster. Foster, seriously wounded, finally surrendered in the afternoon after 43 men were killed and 75 were reported missing. The Confederate loss under Coffee, Hayes, and Thompson's command was 118 men. Now, I want you to remember those numbers. 2,000 Confederates in the force that attacked, and they're saying that the Confederates lost 118 men. Let's see what Tro says about that battle. And by the way, one more picture. This is someone's drawing of their concept of the battle of Lone Jack. So if you want to see what the battle didn't look like, it didn't look like this picture. And finally, I couldn't resist but to throw in this picture, number 25. Dennis, don't you just want to grab your detector and head for that house? I'm telling you, that looks like prime detecting. I'm sure that house saw the battle or saw the troops go by. Okay. All right. So once there stood a lone blackjack tree. Now, blackjack tree, for you folks that live up north, you probably wouldn't know what that is, but if you've ever lived in Texas, you know it's an oak tree, a blackjack oak. So the Lone Jack fight had to do with this tree, a blackjack oak that was taller than its surrounding trees and larger than any near it. And from this tree, the town of Lone Jack in the eastern portion of Jackson County was named. On the afternoon of the 13th of August, clouds were seen gathering there. These clouds were cavalrymen. They were, he uses the word succoring recruits, or they were trying to, I think of a better word here than succoring. Succoring means kind of to rescue. This is one place I probably disagree with him on his choice of words. They were trying to commandeer recruits in every manner possible and helping them on to rendezvous by roads or lanes or watercourses. Horsemen acquainted with the country kept riding continuously up and down. A company of these on the evening of the 15th were in the village of Lone Jack. Major Emory L. Foster, doing active scouting duty in the region around Lexington. That's Lexington, Missouri. They had a battle there, and I believe it's the courthouse building has these big, giant white columns. And if you go to Lexington, you want to definitely go see the courthouse and look at these columns because, as I recall, as you're looking at them on your left, near the top of one of the columns, there's a cannonball sticking in the column still. I should have should have tried to pull a picture on that. All right, so lost my place. Hang on a minute. Okay, so he's doing scouting duty around about Lexington. He had his headquarters in the town of Lone Jack. The capture of Independence had been like a blow upon the cheek. He would avenge it. He knew how to fight. There was dash about him. He had enterprise. Prairie life had enlarged his vision, and he did not see the war like a martinet. He felt within him the glow of generous ambition. He loved his uniform for the honor it had. He would see about that independence business, about that Quantrell living there between the two blues, that's the Big Blue River and the Little Blue River, and raiding the West, about those gray recruiting folks riding up from the South, about the tales of ambushes that were told eternally of Jackson County and of all the toils spread for the wary Jayhawkers. You know, we've covered a lot of ground to this point, and we've never really gotten out of Jackson County very much. Jackson County was the number one hotbed county for guerrilla activity and all these fights the first 2 years of the war. So, you know, if there's anybody out there in Missouri that intends to try to hunt Quantrell sites, you want to focus on Jackson County. I sure would. I wish it was a lot closer. It's a good long drive for me. But I would go there, you know, on a brand new site like the one that I may get to go on. I'll make a trip up there to do that. I don't have to dig every Quantrell site, but I would love to have a few Quantrell relics for my collection. You know, Dennis, it would be very easy to identify a Quantrell battle site over a regular Civil War site.
Yeah.
You know, how would you do that? I'm going to put you on the spot.
Well, I don't know, so you'll have to inform us.
Let's ask the noble Bill Marsh. Bill Marsh, how would you do that? How would you identify a Quantrell site? I'll give you a hint. You would identify it by the bullets. Any regular Civil War battle, you're going to have 3-ringer minis, round balls, 69 caliber round balls, and probably some Georgia slicks or infield bullets that don't have any rings. It's what you're going to find. And you might find some cavalry carbine bullets, solid base, and a few pistol bullets. But here again, this is where the history detective skill comes into the equation. What were Quantrell's men fighting with? Walk you through it, Dennis. What were they fighting with?
Well, the pistols, obviously.
Right.
And they were
44
Colt. Go ahead.
Yeah, mostly Colt 44s, Navy Colts. Big, heavy dragoon pistols. So what kind of bullets are you going to find fired where the Yankees were on a Quantrell site? You're going to find 44 Colt pistols. You're not going to find mini balls.
Yeah.
See, it's not only what you find, it's what you don't find. Now.
And Bill answered your question, by the way.
Okay.
He said buy the 44 caliber pistol balls.
Okay. Now there's another way, Bill. That's only half of it. Who were they fighting most of the time? They were fighting cavalry as opposed to infantry. Right? I mean, yep. all the battles we've been reading about were cavalry. What were the cavalry armed with? Cavalry carbines and Colt pistols. So, where Quantrell's men were, you're going to find fired solid base cavalry carbines, probably Sharps, Maynards, maybe some Burnsides, and you might find the brass cartridges where they were fired from, the locations they were fired from. And you're going to find a few Colt pistol bullets where Quantrell's men were firing from, that the Yankees fired at them. So it's going to be very easy to identify a Quantrell site because basically all you're going to dig is pistol bullets and carbine bullets. You're going to be on a Civil War battle site with probably no three ringers, no round balls, unless you get into double-aught buckshot, because sometimes the rebels carried a sawed-off shotgun in their rifle boot. And they fired 10-gauge shells loaded with double-aught buck. So you might find some double-aught buck. And by the way, for all you folks that have a Garrett AT Pro, if you're on a Civil War battlefield, your double-aught buckshot is going to read right at 42 or 43 on your readout. I dug a bunch of them at Perryville, one after another, and I knew what I had before I ever opened the ground. Sure enough. All right, so we taking a few moments here for a little history detective lesson. Now, I've hunted over 144 Civil War sites in 22 states, and I have never hunted a battle site where I found only 44 caliber Colts and cavalry carbine bullets, Dennis. And the only place that I'm going to probably ever do that, if I do it in this life, will be in Missouri, where Quantrell fought. I hope I get to. That would be really neat, to have about a dozen or 2 dozen bullets. You don't need a huge amount to show everybody and to show how the pistol bullets and the carbine bullets. All right. So we got a battle coming up here. Let's get back into it. Let's see here. So he's personally offended about old Quantrell, and he wants to put an end to Quantrell's shenanigans. And he says the tales of ambushes that were told eternally in Jackson County, of all the toils or snares spread for the unwary jayhawkers, he had heard 2 of the company which halted a moment in Lone Jack as it passed through, and of course it was Quantrell. It was 6 o'clock when the Confederates were there, and 8 o'clock when the Federal Colonel Foster marched in, leading 985 cavalrymen and 2 pieces of Rabb's Indiana battery. That is 2 cannons. A battery which much celebrated for tenacious gunners and accurate firing. Cockrell, who was in command, knew Foster well. The other Confederates knew nothing of him. He was there, however, and that was positive proof enough that he wanted to fight. 700 Confederates, not 2,000 like the sign said, armed with shotguns, horse pistols, squirrel rifles, regulation guns, and whatnot, attacked 985 Federal cavalrymen in a town for a position, armed with Spencer rifles and Colt revolvers. Now, Dennis, that surprises me. This is pretty early in the war for them to be equipped with 7-shot Spencers. But that's what they had, it says here. I'll have to go back and see when the first Spencers were delivered to the Federal Army. He may have meant Sharps, and it may be an error here. Okay, so armed with Spencer rifles, Colt revolvers, dragoon size. There was also the artillery. Lone Jack sat quietly in the green of emerald prairie, its orchards in fruit and its harvest goodly. On the west was timber, and in this timber a stream ran musically along. Here we go with the purple prose again. To the east the prairie stretched, their glass waves crested with sunshine. On the north there were groves in which birds abounded. Some, even the murmuring of doves was heard, and an infinite tremor ran all over the leaves as the wind stirred. Okay, that's too much purple prose. All right, skip that. In the center of town, a large hotel made a strong fortification. All right, that we can get our teeth into. The house, from being a tavern, had come to be a redoubt. Redoubt is a Civil War term for a strong fortification, where troops can take shelter from attack. From the top, the stars and stripes floated proudly, a tricolor that had upon it then more of sunshine than of blood. Later, the three colors had become as four. On the verge of the prairie nearest the town, a hedgerow stood as a line of infantry dressed for battle. It was plumed on the sides with tawny grass. The morning broke on it, and upon armed men crouching there, with a strange barred banner and with guns at trail, here they waited, eager for the signal. Joining Hayes on the left was Cockrell with detachment of Hayes, Rathburn, and Bohannon. Their arms were as varied as their uniforms. It was a duel they were going into, and each man had the gun he could best handle. Now notice, this is not a Quantrell fight. That's why they have all these different weapons. So what you would find on that battlefield, see, would tell you right away that there was regular Confederate army here, not just the guerrillas. From the hedgerow, from the green growing corn, from the orchards and the groves, soldiers could not see much save the flag flying skyward on the redoubt on the cave house. Boy, I want to tell you, I looked long and hard for pictures of the cave house. I thought surely there's going to be some, either modern or else taken, around the time of the war, because it had a Civil War redoubt. It was a fortification. But I could not find one on my first attempt. So at 5 o'clock, a solitary gunshot aroused camp and garrison, and all the soldiers stood face to face with imminent death. No one knew thereafter how the fight commenced. It was Missourian against Missourian, neighbor against neighbor, and rival flags waved over each, and the killing went on. This battle had about it a strange fascination. The combatants were not numerous, yet they fought as men seldom fight in detached bodies. The same fury extended to an army would have ended in annihilation. A tree was a fortification. A hillock was an ambush. The cornfields, from being green, became lurid. Dead men were in the groves. The cries of the wounded came in from the apple orchards. All the houses in town were garrisoned. It was daylight upon the prairies, yet there were lights in the windows, the lights of musket flashes. There is not much to say about the fight in the way of description. The Federals were in Lone Jack. The Confederates had to get them out. House fighting and street fighting are always desperate. The hotel became a hospital, later a holocaust, and over all rose and shone a blessed sun, while the airy fingers of the breeze ruffled the oak leaves, and here we go with the purple prose and all that stuff. Okay. As you can see, Tro's description of the battle is nothing like that picture of all those neat lines of men standing shoulder to shoulder firing at each other. The graycoats crept nearer on east, west, north, or south. Hayes, Cockrell, Tracy, Jackman, Rathburn, or Hunter gained ground. Farmer lads in their first battle began as gawkies and ended as grenadiers. So basically, he's saying in his own way that young men from the farms that were green to battle were experienced veterans at the end of this fight. Old plug hats rose and fell as the red fight ebbed and flowed. The shotgun's heavy boom made clearer the rifle's sharp crack. An hour passed and the struggle had lasted since daylight. Foster fought his men splendidly. Wounded once, he did not make complaint. Now, if you notice, Tro gives credit where credit is due. You know, he doesn't try to make the Yankees look like they're totally incompetent. When he came across a incompetent Yankee commander, he let you know. But when he came across one that was capable and fought bravely, he lets you know that also. I like that. I like that. You know, in an author. You know, Trow was a Southerner through and through, and yet he had that commendable quality of being able to respect an enemy for his soldierly conduct, so to speak. So he says he fought his men splendidly, and even when wounded, he did not make a complaint. And when wounded again, he kept his place, and wounded a third time, he stood with his men until courage and endurance only prolonged his sacrifice. Yeah, I'd say this guy's pretty impressive. Once Haller, commanding 30 of Quantrell's old men, swept up to the guns and over them, that is, Rab's two cannons, the play of the revolvers being as the play of the lightning in a summer cloud, he could not hold them, brave as he was. Then Jackman rushed at them again and bore them backward 20 paces or more. Countercharged, they hammered his grip loose and drove him down the hill. Then Hayes and Hunter, with the old plug hats and wheezy rifles, finished the throttling, and the lions were done roaring. Tracy been wounded, Hunter wounded, Hayes wounded, Captains Bryant and Bradley killed among the Confederates, together with 36 others and 134 wounded. Now, that's a big, quite a bit difference in total, see. But see, Trow was there. Trow was close enough to know what happened. Among the Federals, Foster, the commander, was near unto death. His brother, Captain Foster, was mortally shot and died afterwards. 136 dead lay about the streets and houses of the town, and 550 wounded made up the aggregate of a fight, numbers considered, as desperate and bloody as any that ever crimsoned the annals of a civil war. A few more than 200 breaking through the Confederate lines on the south, where they were the weakest, rushed furiously into Lexington. In other words, they escaped. Haller in pursuit as some beast of prey, leaping upon everything which attempted to make a stand between Lone Jack and Wellington. Captain Trow, who was in this battle, see, I told you he was in the battle, narrates that at one time during the battle, quote, I was forced to lie down and roll across the street to save my scalp. A mighty blow seemed impending. Commanders turned pale, and lest this head or that head felt the trip hammer, all the heads kept wagging and dodging. Burris got out of Cass County. Remember, Burris was one of the Jayhawker commanders? Jennison hurried into Kansas, and the guerrillas kept a sort of open house, and the recruits drove after drove, and mostly unarmed, hastened southward. Then the Federal way, which had first reached beyond all former boundaries, flowed back again and inundated western Missouri. Now, what does that mean? That means they sent in more Federal troops. They ran them out, and then they came back with reinforcements, is what it means. So Quantrell's nominal battalion, yielding to the exodus, left him only the old guard as a rallying point. It was necessary again to reorganize. After the guerrillas had reorganized, they stripped themselves for steady fighting. Federal troops were everywhere, infantry at the post, cavalry on the warpaths. The somber defiance mingled with despair did not come until 1864. In 1862, the guerrillas laughed as they fought. Now, this is a key. Everybody listen up real close here now. And they fought by streams and bridges, where roads crossed and forked, and where trees or hollows were. They fought from houses and haystacks, on foot and on horseback at night, when the weird laughter of owls could be heard in the thickets, in daylight, when the birds sang as they found sweet rest. The black flag was being woven, but it had not yet been unfurled. Breaking suddenly out of Jackson County, Quantrell raided Shawneetown, Kansas, and captured its garrison of 50 militia. Then and I'm not sure how this is pronounced, if anybody knows, then at Olathe, It's probably an Indian word, so it's probably Olathe, Kansas. The next day, the right hand did what the left one finished so well at Shawneetown. 75 Federals surrendered there. Each garrison was patrolled and set free, except 7 from Shawneetown. They were Jennison's Jayhawkers, and they had to die. A military execution is where one man kills another. It is horrible. In battle, one does not see death. He is there surely. He is in that battery smoke on the crest of that hill fringed with the fringe of pallid faces, under the hoofs of the horses, yonder where the blue or gray line creeps onward, trailing ominous guns. But his cold, calm eyes look at no single victim. The 7 men rode into Missouri from Shawneetown puzzled. When the heavy timber along the Big Blue was reached and a halt made, they were praying. Quantrell sat upon his horse looking at the Kansans. His voice was unmoved, his countenance perfectly indifferent as he ordered, "Bring ropes, 4 on one tree, 3 on another." All of a sudden, death stood in the midst of them and was recognized. One poor fellow gave a cry as piercing as the neighing of a frightened horse. 2 trembled, and the trembling is the first step towards kneeling. They had not talked any except among themselves up to this time, and when they saw Blunt busy with some ropes, one spoke up to Quantrell. "Captain, just a word. The pistol before the rope, a soldier's before a dog's death. As for me, I'm ready." Of all 7, this was the youngest. How brave he was. The prisoners were arranged in line, the guerrillas opposite to them. They had confessed to belonging to Jennison, but denied the charge of killing and burning. Quantrell hesitated a moment. His blue eyes searched each face from left to right, and back again, and then he ordered, "Take 6 men, Blunt, and do the work. Shoot the young man and hang the balance." The oldest man there, some white hair was in his beard, prayed audibly. Some embraced, silence and twilight as twin ghosts crept up the riverbank together. Blunt made haste, and before Quantrell had ridden far, he heard a pistol shot. He did not even look up. It affected him no more than the tapping of a woodpecker. At daylight the next morning, a woodchopper was going early to work and saw 6 stark figures swaying in the river breeze. At the foot of another tree was a dead man, and in his forehead a bullet hole, the old mark. After Quantrell hanged these men, the only time I was ever scared during the war, relates Captain Trow, I had left camp one night to visit a lady friend of mine, and a company of Federals got after me, and in the chase I took to the woods, and it was at the place where Quantrell had hanged these men. My saddle girth broke right there, but I held on to my horse. I thought the devil and all of his angels were after me, but I made it to the camp. Okay, let's see. Trying to think. I have a picture. Oh dear, I didn't post it. Okay, I forgot to put it back into this. I have a picture, a drawing of the men hanging from the trees. I was going to post. I think it was actually a postcard at one time. All right, well, Dennis, we are a little bit short, but this was the rest of part 3.
All right. And we still have folks, too, so that's good.
All righty. So, anyway, with this part tonight and what we did before, that will complete part 3. And I have not done any preparation past that point.
Well, okay. Well, we're about an hour and 20 minutes into this one, and whatever they had before, I don't know if Mike's going to join them together or what, but I reckon we can call this a night unless somebody has questions or anything out there in the live audience. I'm
sure there'll be one comment forthcoming here momentarily.
Momentarily, yes, we can anticipate that. Ah, there, Scotty said treasure story. Actually, T/S question mark, but I assume that's treasure story.
Well, Dennis, I feel like you've been underutilized tonight. Why don't you furnish us a treasure story tonight?
Oh, Lord. I don't have a book here where I can.
Just tell us a story about somebody else that you know that recovered some treasure. You can leave out their names.
Well, I'll tell you what. We can do this. This would be a good exercise for folks, and y'all can even contact me offline with this. I'm going to leave out the names, though, and make y'all do some work. But there was a cattleman here in Texas, and I can give you a date. He made his money from 1860 until 1870 when he was killed. Now, Dorian, you know the one I'm talking about, and that's okay. I think I'm pretty close to this one, so y'all better hurry up. But this cattleman, he buried about $44,000 in gold that has still present in the ground, and their family still owns some land. I can tell y'all that he made 2 runs to Fort Sumner, New Mexico, and 1 or 2 runs up to Kansas City, Kansas, and each time he was paid in gold coins up until the last trip that he made in 1870. And in that year, on his way back, he was massacred along with his friends that he was with, and his body was mutilated, and he had never told anybody where the gold was. At that time, he had about $11,000 in folding money on this last trip, and that was recovered. And it was the first time he had done so. And right now today, if you were to go, y'all have to look a little bit, find out where I'm at. And if you look about 60 miles west of me, no, not that far, about 45 miles west of me, that's the area of Texas that this occurred in. Now, I know that's not much of a treasure story, but I'm going to tell y'all something. That treasure right now, there's $44,000 in circa 1860 to 1868 gold coins that are still present. And conservatively, there's 8 years within that time period. No, not 8. Within that time period, there's 7 years within that time period. A single gold coin in extremely fine condition will bring between $700,000 and $950,000 on today's market. So conservatively, there's about a $9 million treasure right there in today's terms. Now, I'll also tell you, if y'all look, or if you have any questions, y'all can call me or look me up. I'm easy to find. Y'all find me and ask questions, and I'll be glad to answer y'all. And no, it wasn't John Wayne, but we had a guest there. But it's out there in the history books, and if you look into some of the history books written in the area 45 miles west of me, you probably run into this fellow. He's pretty well known in this area. And I'll tell you, on his tombstone it says he was murdered by Indians, which that would probably give you a big clue. And that's so there you go. That's not a lot, but that's off the top of my head. It is a true story.
That's good.
I have worked on this treasure for about almost 4 years personally. And I have a lot of information, and I'm very close, but there's that old adage, if you miss it by an inch, you've missed it by a mile. And so you guys, if you have any information and you contact me, I'll tell you, right, yes, wrong, whatever. Won't lie to you either. It's, who knows, somebody out there might find a key, and I've given you enough information that you guys, you do a little bit of history detective work and know, and I'm not familiar with John Slaughter. There was a George Slaughter that was actually the last gentleman that brought military orders to the Alamo from Sam Houston. And he was about the right distance. And I'm scheduled with Gypsy Jules. I'm going to take her up to George Slaughter's big cattle pen that he had in making drives up to Kansas City from, which isn't very far. But John Slaughter, I hadn't heard of him. George Slaughter, I have. And
wow. You never watched Walt Disney?
Ah, well, yeah. Yeah.
Hey, Dennis.
Yeah.
Don't you remember? With Texas John Slaughter, men did what they oughter, 'cause if they didn't, they died.
Well, no. And as much as y'all would probably hate this, I've never seen Yellow Brick Road either. No, that's Wizard of Oz, not the Yellow Brick Road.
Yeah, there you go.
Yep. But anyway, there you go. It's a quick gold story. It's true, and it's still out there. So.
Hang on a minute.
Yeah.
You bought me time, and I've got a story for Bill.
Ah, okay.
You bought me time, and I thought one up. This is kind of personally embarrassing, but I'll go ahead and tell it anyway. When I was working at Garrett, had a fella come in, and he was down from near Waxahachie, Texas. And he lived in an old house that's set up on fieldstone pillars. Not mortar, just stacked rock pillars. And he brought in some Spanish cob coins, silver coins, dated in the 1500s, that 7 of them that he said he had found while digging around the base of one of these columns. He was going to replace a rock that had broken, and he claimed to found these columns. And we got to talking, and he said that back of his place, he said the old stagecoach road went kind of almost right by his house. And the ground around was just open fields, but there was a 5-acre patch of woods, just about square. And the old stagecoach road went right through the middle of it. It was a sunken road about 2 feet deep, probably, very sandy soil. And he told me a story about a stagecoach robbery, and that the 2 outlaws had buried a strong box somewhere in that 5-acre patch of woods, and then had been killed by the posse in a shootout. Well, I was pretty green around the edges when it came to approaching a project like that with the mind of a history detective or a professional treasure hunter. But this is kind of how you learn, Bill. These are the kind of things that spur you to get better. I worked that whole 5-acre woods with a big Garrett Deep Seeker, and a 14-inch coil. I was going to find that strong box. I believed the guy. The guy seemed very nice, very sincere. And I never questioned the authenticity of the story. So I started at one end, and I hunted the left side all the way from beginning to end. Every square foot of ground got a detector swung over it in between the trees and up against the trees, and I got no metal signals at all, maybe 1 or 2 shotgun shells, if that many. So I started on the right-hand side of the old stagecoach road. I mean, you could see it through the woods, and that's what made the story sound so good to me. There actually was an old stagecoach road through the woods and across the fields. So I started working the other side, at the end closest to his back of his house, and then getting farther away. And I hunted it and hunted it and hunted it, and nothing. And I got down to the very edge of that right part of the woods, where I was only 5 feet from bursting out of the woods into the open field. I've got, a strip 5 feet long, 5 feet deep, and about, 150 feet, maybe 200 feet long. So I start at the far end corner, and I work that strip, which, I can cover in one swing. I can cover 5 foot right to left. And I get down almost to the old sunken stagecoach road. I mean, I'm about 4 to 6 feet from the road, and I get a big old metal signal, the very first one at whole 5 acres, and it's the last piece of ground in the whole 5 acres that I hadn't hunted. What's the chances of that? Well, the soil was really easy to dig. It was sandy, loose, and I'm digging away like a gopher, and I hear clunk, the sound of my army shovel hitting cast iron. Well, I just about did something I would have been embarrassed to have done if I had been able to hold it, but I did. I knew I had it. I knew I had my strong box. My old heart's thumping away. And I dug more soil out, and there was rusty cast iron, flat, looking right at me. And I tapped on the shovel, clunk, 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 clunk. Oh, yeah. Oh, this is it. Oh, yeah. So I started enlarging the hole, and I've only gone about 6 inches to one side, and suddenly my shovel's going down. And I thought, oh, this must be one edge of the strong box. So I go back the other way, and just a couple of inches from what I have exposed, my shovel goes down again. What I've hit that's cast iron is only about 8 inches wide. Can't be a strong box. Check the signal, and it's kind of long in one direction. So I keep digging, and I finally am able to loosen my prize from the soil. And what I had, the only piece of major metal, excuse me, in that whole entire 5 acres of woods that I've worked, I had the fender of a Model T Ford. And Dennis, it was in good enough condition to go right back on the car.
Wow.
So anyway, the rest of the story, Bill, is that this guy was a total phony. He was a lonely old man who wanted some attention. And he found a willing sucker in me. So I learned a hard lesson on that project.
And they're still out there. Us lonely old men, we got to tell stories. Oh no, I mean them.
Oh,
yeah.
I thought you meant the rest of the parts to that Model T.
Oh yeah. Well, in my early days, I think it's about 75, and I was still using a BFO at that time, a Garrett.
Yeah.
And I was at an old farmhouse that supposedly had a cache, and I got a signal, and it was about 2 feet wide, and I thought, oh man, I had visions of glory, and I dug, and it was hard Texas ground right then, and because in summer, which it does, and I ended up getting down probably 2 feet, and the signal started going away. You remember the old Garrett BFO that had I think it was a 12-inch coil and the 5-inch coil?
Oh,
well,
yeah.
I was using that 5-inch coil, and the signal started going away on that BFO, and I thought, how can that be? And so I enlarged my hole, and that ended up being a huge, about a 3-foot diameter roll of barbed wire that I was in the center of it. And, that was hard. I probably spent 4 hours digging the hole. It was that hard. And I felt like an idiot. On the good side, I did have a little bit of a treasure because this is really, really old barbed wire from the 1800s.
Well,
and I had about probably 100 feet of it or so, and that's the kind that would sell by the foot. And I had it for almost one day before the owner of the property, who was an old man, and he came up there and he confiscated that barbed wire. And so I dug him a nice treasure, you know, and it's probably several $100 worth back then. But I identify, you know, we don't always know what we dig up, but there again, you know, you don't dig it, you don't get it. You don't never know. That's why we got to dig it all, right?
Absolutely.
To it. Well, my friend,
Yeah.
I think it's been a great night tonight. I'm glad that we were able to keep on. I believe I've got the glitches out of on my end controlling that part of it. So I look forward to part 4. So you guys, with that, I'll say good night. Dorian, you want to sign us off?
Yep. Good night, everybody. Thanks for listening, and you know, keep your revolver close to your side, and keep your horse ready to ride.
There you go. Keep that powder dry. Take care, y'all. We'll see you.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.